The stars outside the UHS Liberty flickered like distant dreams, casting their cold light on the bridge where Commander Elias Kale stood, staring into the vastness of space. His fingers drummed softly on the console in front of him, his mind racing. It had been a journey of diplomacy, patience, and sacrifice, all for one simple goal: equality for humanity in the Galactic Council. But today, everything had changed. Elias had always believed in the dream of unity, of the galaxy coming together to ensure peace, fairness, and cooperation. He had fought for Earth's place at the table, for humanity's rightful seat in the Council of the Stars. But now, the vision of the future he had worked for lay in ruins, torn apart by the very forces that had once promised equality. The message had arrived hours ago: humanity's requests are denied. The Galactic Council, a collection of powerful species who ruled over the galaxy, had pulled the rug from under them. All the progress humanity had made, the years of negotiation, the building of alliances, were thrown away with a single decision. Earth's request for more control over its trade routes, more influence in council decisions, had been rejected. But it wasn't just the rejection that stung. It was the way the council had done it, behind closed doors, in a rushed meeting, with no regard for the humanity that had sacrificed so much to be here. They treated humans like they were nothing but pawns in a much larger game, unworthy of true participation in the greater galactic community. The betrayal cut deeper than Elias expected. He had always known that the council was made up of factions looking out for their own interests, but he had never imagined they would so casually discard everything Earth had worked for. Elias turned from the console and looked out the window of the ship. The UHS Liberty, Earth's most powerful ship, was now the heart of the human fleet. Yet in that moment it felt like a symbol of failure. What good was power if it was rejected by those who should have been allies? What good were Earth's advancements if they weren't enough to change the minds of those in control? Behind him, Lieutenant Mara Ishin entered the bridge, her face grim. She had been with him through countless missions, a constant presence in the turbulent years since humanity's rise to power. They had been through so much together. Yet, even Mara, strong and steadfast, could see the shift in his demeanor. "Commander," she began, her voice soft, "I know this isn't what we expected, but we can still fight this. We've always fought for what's right." Elias turned to face her, his expression hard, his eyes burning with a quiet rage. "It's not just about fighting for what's right anymore, Mara. The Council has made their decision. They've turned their backs on us. There's no going back from this." Mara stepped forward, her resolve matching his. "We can still make them listen. We've earned our place here." "Have we?" Elias asked bitterly. "I thought we had, but they've shown us exactly where we stand. To them, we're nothing more than another species to be manipulated. Earth's place in this galaxy is just a temporary illusion, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise." The room was silent for a long moment. The hum of the ship's engines was the only sound that filled the space between them. Finally, Elias spoke again, his voice colder than before. "It's time we stopped asking for permission." Mara's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of understanding crossing her face. "You're not saying—" "I'm saying we issue the order. We stop waiting for their approval. Humanity has fought too long to be pushed around, and we've been patient for far too long. If they want to treat us like we don't matter, then we'll show them just how wrong they are." Mara hesitated for a second but then nodded. She knew Elias wasn't one to act impulsively. He had always led with caution, with patience. But this betrayal had cut deep. And now, a new fire had ignited in him, one that burned with a single, powerful desire: to show the galaxy that humanity would no longer be ignored. The decision was made. There was no turning back. Elias strode to the command console, his fingers flying over the keys. The ship systems activated, and a moment later, the vast fleet of human ships surrounding Earth's orbit came online. The message was simple, and it would be broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. This is Commander Elias Kale, representing the people of Earth. From this moment forward, we no longer bow to the Galactic Council. We issue the order. Humanity will no longer wait for permission. We will take what is ours, and we will make the galaxy hear us." As the words left his lips, a heavy silence fell across the bridge. Every officer, every soldier aboard the UHS Liberty understood what this meant. There would be no more negotiation, no more talking. They had done everything they could to be part of the council, but now it was time for a new path. A path forged in defiance, in strength, and in the conviction that humanity's place in the galaxy was no longer up for debate. The galaxy was watching, and humanity's message would echo across the stars. As the order went out, the human fleet moved in unison. They would take control of the resources that had been denied to them. They would fortify Earth's position, expand their influence, and challenge the Council's authority. The stakes were high, and there was no turning back. But Elias felt something stirring inside him, something that had been buried for too long. He was no longer the commander of Earth's forces. He was now the leader of a new movement, one that would fight for humanity's right to stand tall among the stars. And he would not stop until the galaxy understood one thing. Humanity would not be ignored. The message had been sent. The word was out. Humanity had issued the order. There was no going back. The UHS Liberty had broadcast Elias' defiant words across the galaxy, and now the world would change. Earth's fleet, ready and primed for action, was already moving into position, locking their sights on the targets that had long been denied to them. Yet even as the first wave of humanity's rebellion surged forward, Elias couldn't shake the heavy feeling in his chest. The decision had been made, but the consequences were just beginning to unfold. The galaxy had been watching, and now they were responding. The first call came in shortly after. Ambassador Zelkin, the Rethari representative, had been a vocal supporter of humanity's cause once, but his tone was cold now, filled with disbelief. "Commander Kale," Zelkin began, his voice sharp with anger, "what you've done is more than a declaration of independence. You've made a choice that cannot be undone. The Council will not stand idly by. You are pushing us to the brink of war." Elias stood on the bridge, his eyes glued to the holographic map as it shifted. The human fleet was moving steadily, but he knew there were others already in motion. The Rethari, the Krylian, and several other species were preparing their forces. What had started as a move for peace, a plea for equality, had escalated into an all-out rebellion. "We're not the ones starting this war," Elias replied firmly, his voice steady but carrying a weight of emotion. "The Council is the one who turned its back on us. We've asked for years to be treated equally. Now we fight for our place, for our future, and we will not be silenced." Zelkin's voice faltered for just a moment. "You don't understand. This isn't just about you. It's about the galaxy. The balance that's been in place for centuries. If you continue down this path, you'll destroy everything." Elias' eyes hardened. "I've already lost everything, but I'll make sure the galaxy doesn't fall with us." The transmission ended, leaving a silence that felt like an eternity. Elias looked around the bridge at his crew, all of them staring at him with a mix of uncertainty and determination. They had always trusted him, but now they were stepping into unknown territory. The fleet moved out, pushing past Earth's defenses and taking control of strategic points across the galaxy. Their first target was the Tizar system, a critical trade route that had been controlled by the Council for decades. The human ships, sleek and agile, moved swiftly, cutting through the void like predators in the night. But as they neared their objective, they encountered their first real resistance. The Rethari fleet appeared out of nowhere, a massive force of warships, their dark hull vessels closing in on humanity's position. Zelkin's warning had been clear. The rebellion would not go unanswered. It had only taken a few hours for the Council to muster a response, and now humanity was face to face with the first battle of their newfound war. Elias stood at the command console, his mind racing as the Rethari ships advanced. The human fleet was outnumbered, but they had speed, agility, and one undeniable advantage: the heart of the orbital fortress, their power source. But even with that advantage, the stakes were high. The odds were against them. "All ships," Elias barked, his voice cutting through the tension. "Form up. Focus on their weak points. We can't let them take control of the Tizar system." The battle began with a blinding flash. Weapons from both fleets lit up the blackness of space, missiles and laser beams flying with deadly precision. Human ships danced around the much larger Rethari vessels, using their speed and agility to evade the incoming fire. Yet, despite their advantages, the Rethari ships were formidable, their advanced shields and firepower creating a deadly barrier. But humanity fought back with everything they had. The UHS Liberty led the charge, weaving through enemy fire and firing its own heavy cannons. Human fighters dove in and out of the fray, targeting key systems, and using their smaller, faster crafts to harass the larger Rethari ships. Elias' heart pounded in his chest as the battle raged around him. Come on," he muttered under his breath. This was it. There was no retreat, no turning back. Humanity's first strike had to succeed. Hours later, the battle had turned in humanity's favor. The Rethari fleet, though strong, had been overwhelmed by the relentless, unpredictable strikes of the human fleet. The Tizar system was now firmly under human control, the first victory in what would be a long, hard war. But the victory felt hollow. Elias knew the council would not give up easily, and even if they did, the rebellion was already spreading. It was no longer just about trade routes or diplomacy. This was about a galaxy that had been built on the bones of countless species, a galaxy that now faced the consequences of its own apathy. As the last of the Rethari ships retreated, Elias allowed himself a moment of relief. But it was short-lived. The transmission that followed immediately after was from none other than Ambassador Zelkin, his face now a mask of anger. "This isn't over, Commander," Zelkin spat. "The galaxy will never allow you to succeed. You've made your choice and you will be hunted. The Galactic Council will unite against you, and when it does, there will be nowhere for you to hide." Elias clenched his fists, staring at the cold image of Zelkin. The threat was clear, but there was no going back now. "Let them come," Elias said under his breath. "We'll face them all, and we will win." The UHS Liberty turned toward the next target on their list, their fleet prepared to push forward. The first victory had been won, but the real battle was just beginning. Humanity had been betrayed, but now they had the power to change the galaxy. Elias Kale looked out at the stars once more, the weight of what they had done settling on his shoulders. "This is only the beginning," he said, his voice steady. The galaxy was about to witness something it had never seen before. The Tizar system was secure, but the victory felt bittersweet. As Elias Kale stood on the bridge of the UHS Liberty, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy, the weight of their actions pressed down on him. Humanity had issued the order. They had struck first, and for now they had won. But as the human fleet moved forward, claiming new territories and securing systems that had once been closed off to them, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something deep inside. The rebellion wasn't just a fight for resources or influence anymore. It had become a fight for survival. The galaxy was waking up, but not in the way humanity had hoped. The Galactic Council wasn't just watching, they were mobilizing. The first strike had been powerful, but Elias knew the real war had just begun. The Council had thousands of ships at their disposal, and they were not going to let one rebellious species tear everything they had built apart. The galaxy's fragile peace was on the brink of collapse, and humanity was standing at the heart of that storm. Days passed, and with every hour that passed, the human fleet grew stronger. They had taken the Tizar system, but they needed more, far more. The Rethari had retreated, but they would not stay silent for long. The next move would come quickly. Elias stood at the command console, his fingers brushing over the map. "What's the status of the other fleets?" he asked, his voice low. Lieutenant Mara Ishin stepped forward, her face pale with exhaustion. "We've secured the outer systems, but we're starting to see signs of movement from the Council's fleets. They're rallying. They won't wait long before retaliating." "We knew this would happen," Elias said, his voice hard. "Prepare for their strike. We have to push forward now, take the systems that matter. We can't wait for them to hit us first." Mara nodded, but Elias could see the uncertainty in her eyes. The rebellion had grown faster than anyone had anticipated. They were no longer just defending their home. They were pushing for something greater, something far riskier. And now, the stakes were higher than ever. The call came late that night. Admiral Hoshino, the leader of humanity's military forces, was on the other end of the transmission. His face was grim, the line crackling with static. "Commander Kale," Hoshino said, his voice tight, "the Council's retaliation is already underway. They've mobilized their fleets and they're coming for us. They've sent word to the entire galaxy. Humanity is a threat that must be eliminated." Elias took a deep breath, his mind racing. "And what about our position? Are we ready?" "We're ready," Hoshino said, but Elias could hear the worry in his voice. "But the enemy has more ships than we do. They have strength in numbers, and if we don't act quickly, we'll be surrounded. We need reinforcements." Elias nodded, already thinking ahead. Reinforcements would come, but it might not be in time. "No, we're not waiting. We take the next step now." The UHS Liberty set course for the Kreiner system, one of the Council's most important trade routes. If they could seize it, they would gain a significant advantage, both strategically and symbolically. The human fleet moved out quickly, leaving behind the chaos of the Tizar system. The next target was clear, the Council's heart. But as they neared the Kreiner system, the first signs of the Council's retaliation became apparent. The distant stars were suddenly filled with the cold, looming shapes of enemy ships, massive dreadnoughts, battle cruisers, and fleets of fighters, their engines glowing bright against the dark expanse. The message had already been sent. The galaxy would not let humanity rise without a fight. "They're here," Mara said, her voice tight with tension. "They're coming at us in full force." Elias watched the screens, his hands gripping the console. "Stay calm," he said. "We've been through worse. We have the upper hand." But even as he spoke those words, Elias knew they were on the verge of something they hadn't prepared for. The Council's forces were too powerful, too numerous. This battle would decide the fate of humanity's place in the galaxy. There could be no turning back. The battle began as the first wave of enemy ships came into view. The human fleet responded with a roar, weapons firing as ships swerved and darted through the void. The UHS Liberty led the charge, its cannons roaring, its engines pushing it forward like a spear through the heart of the enemy. Human ships swarmed, darting in and out of enemy fire, targeting weak points and breaking apart the Council's formation. But for every ship they took down, more came in, forming a wall of firepower that threatened to crush humanity's forces. The Rithari, the Krylian, and the other factions had joined the fight, and they fought with a vengeance. Elias gripped the console, his eyes locked on the screen, tracking the movements of the enemy fleet. The weight of his decisions pressed on him, but there was no time to second-guess. They had started this fight, and now they had to finish it. "All ships focus on their command vessels," Elias barked, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We take their leadership down, and the rest will fall." The human fleet surged forward, pushing into the heart of the enemy formation. The battle raged for hours, explosions rocking the ships, the air thick with the smell of burnt metal and ionized plasma. Human ships took hits, their shields failing under the brutal assault. But still, they pushed forward, driven by the desire for survival. By the time the sun rose over the battle-scarred Kreiner system, the UHS Liberty had pushed the Council's forces back. But the victory had come at a great cost. The human fleet had lost many ships, and the damage to their fleet was significant. The Tizar and Kreiner systems were secured, but the rebellion was not over. Elias stood in front of the bridge's observation window, looking out at the stars, the cold void beyond. His mind was still spinning with the enormity of their actions. They had won this battle, but the war had just begun. The Galactic Council would not rest until humanity was crushed, and new enemies would rise to challenge them. But Elias Kale was not afraid. Humanity had been betrayed, but now they had the power to change their fate. They had the strength to fight, the courage to rise, and they would not stop until the galaxy understood one simple truth. Humanity would never bow again. Humanity's first strike had ignited a firestorm. The Council, wounded and angry, had rallied its fleets, sending them against Earth's forces in a series of brutal retaliations. After securing the Tizar and Kreiner systems, humanity had managed to defend itself, but the cost was high. Too high. The UHS Liberty had taken damage, as had many of the ships in the human fleet. But worse still, the Council wasn't just fighting, they were adapting. Elias Kale stood on the bridge of the UHS Liberty, staring out at the stars. The battle was far from over. In fact, it was only beginning. The Galactic Council had deployed more ships, bolstering their forces with allies from distant systems, and the latest reports confirmed it. The rebellion had sparked more than just a military response. It had ignited fear and hatred in every corner of the galaxy. There were whispers of the human threat spreading through the galaxy. Some species now saw them as a force of nature, an unstoppable wave of destruction. Others feared they would become the new empire, the next tyrants to rise to power. To most, humanity had gone too far. But Elias knew one thing: humanity was fighting for its survival, and there was no turning back. "Commander, we've received another transmission," Mara Ishin said as she entered the bridge. Her voice was tense, but her face remained calm. Elias turned, meeting her gaze. She had been with him through it all. She had seen the cost of their decisions, and yet she still stood by him. Elias nodded. "Put it through." The screen flickered, and the hologram of Ambassador Zelkin appeared, his Rithari features sharp and severe. The flickering transmission was distorted, but his anger was still clear. "Commander Kale," Zelkin's voice came through, cold and cutting. "Your actions have put the entire galaxy at risk. The Council has issued a decree. Humanity's actions will be answered with force. You will either fall in line or face the consequences. Do not mistake our restraint for weakness." Elias' jaw tightened. He had expected this. The Council had always used its power to intimidate, to manipulate, but this time it wasn't going to work. "You think I don't understand the consequences," Elias said, his voice steady. "You think this is about us trying to dominate the galaxy. No, this is about humanity taking its rightful place. We've spent too long begging for a seat at your table. Now, we're taking one." Zelkin's eyes narrowed and the transmission cut off. The anger in his face was unmistakable, but it was also a sign of something else: desperation. As the transmission ended, Elias turned back to the stars. He knew the Rithari weren't the only ones who would come after them. The Krylian fleet was already on its way, and the Brellians, a powerful species with a long history of aggression, had declared their support for the Council. The alliances were shifting, and humanity was now the center of a galactic storm. "We need to prepare," Mara said, stepping up beside him. "We have the advantage in the systems we've secured, but they're going to come for us. Hard." Elias nodded. "I know, we've been preparing for this." He paused, his eyes scanning the map. "But it's not just about preparing for their attacks. It's about keeping our allies intact. If the galaxy turns against us, if we lose the support of those who are still with us, we're done." Mara met his gaze. "You're right. We need to build alliances even in this mess. But what if they turn on us too?" Elias' eyes hardened. "We fight. We keep fighting until they see who we really are, until they understand that we won't back down. Humanity won't be a slave to anyone, not the Council, not the Rithari, not anyone. The next few days were a whirlwind of tactical planning and defensive maneuvers. The UHS Liberty and the rest of the human fleet moved with precision, establishing fortified positions in the systems they controlled. Every ship was put to use, every officer committed to the cause. They weren't just defending their home anymore, they were securing humanity's future. But as the fleet moved deeper into enemy-held territory, the stakes became higher. The Krylian forces, now aligned with the Council, were approaching the Tizar system with a massive fleet. Their ships were known for their advanced weaponry and superior shielding, making them a difficult adversary. They would not be easy to defeat. Elias stood in the war room with his top officers. The Krylian fleet is arriving in hours. We need to set a trap. Lieutenant Darin Vogel, the tactical officer, looked up from his console. We know they'll be coming through the main route, sir. We've already set up a defensive perimeter around the asteroid belt. If we can draw them in, we'll have the advantage. Then we make them come to us, Elias said, his voice unwavering. We strike fast and hard. We use the asteroid belt to our advantage and hit them before they can set up their defenses. And make no mistake, we won't show mercy. This is our chance to send a message. Mara stepped forward. A message. Elias met her gaze. That humanity will do whatever it takes to survive, and that we will never kneel to the Council again. The battle began as the Krylian fleet entered the asteroid belt. The human ships, well-positioned and ready, struck with precision. The first shots were fired, and the UHS Liberty led the charge, its cannons lighting up the sky. The Krylian ships, though powerful, were caught off guard. The smaller human ships darted around them, using the asteroids as cover and striking their enemies at weak points. For hours the battle raged. The Krylian fleet fought back fiercely, but the humans were relentless. The UHS Liberty tore through the Krylian flagships, each explosion sending ripples through space. The human fleet had never been so unified, so determined. As the last Krylian ships began to retreat, Elias stood in front of the observation window, watching the aftermath. The battle had been won, but it had come at a cost. The human fleet had suffered heavy losses, yet they had sent a message loud and clear. We've proven it, Mara said softly, standing beside him. They won't stop us, not now. Elias turned to her, his expression resolute. No, we fight until they understand, until the galaxy understands. We will take our place. The stars outside the window shimmered as the human fleet sailed forward, knowing that the war was far from over. They had won the battle, but the true fight for their future had just begun. The galaxy was changing, and with each passing hour, the consequences of humanity's rebellion grew heavier. The Tizar and Kryner systems had been secured, but the victory felt hollow. Elias Kale knew that what had started as a fight for equality had now become something far more dangerous, a full-scale war. The Galactic Council had mobilized their forces, calling upon their strongest allies to take action. The rebellion that humanity had sparked was now a galaxy-wide conflict, and every move they made would come at a price. Elias stood in the war room of the UHS Liberty, staring at the holographic map that spanned the table in front of him. The red and blue lights of enemy fleets glowed in sharp contrast to the empty black of space. It was a chessboard of violence, each piece a fleet, a system, a life. We've made progress, but they're closing in on us, Mara Ishin said, her voice heavy with concern. She stood beside Elias, her eyes tracing the movements of the enemy on the map. The Council had thrown everything at them, including the Krylian forces, which had now formed an alliance with the Rithari and the Brellians. Elias didn't need to hear the words to understand the gravity of the situation. The enemy fleet was large, and it was coming for them. The alliance of Council forces was preparing for a final push, one that would wipe humanity out once and for all, or so they thought. How long do we have? Elias asked, his voice grim. Mara looked at the map. Hours at best. The Krylian fleet is less than a day away from our position. We can't hold this forever. Elias exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the decision that was coming. They had no choice but to fight. They had to keep pushing forward no matter the cost. Prepare for the worst. We'll set up a defensive perimeter, but we're not running. We face them head-on. Mara's eyes met his, and for a brief moment they shared the unspoken understanding that this could be the end. Humanity had come so far, but Elias knew there was a chance they wouldn't survive what was coming. Yet in his heart there was no turning back. Not now. The human fleet had fought hard for every inch of space they controlled, but Elias knew that the battle for survival was never just about winning. It was about sending a message. The Galactic Council had underestimated them. They had thought humanity would cower under the weight of their betrayal, but Elias had made it clear, humanity would not be silenced. Still, as the countdown to the inevitable battle ticked down, Elias couldn't ignore the sacrifices made to get here. The UHS Liberty had lost many good men and women in the previous battles. Every victory had come with a price: lives lost, families broken, and homes destroyed. Elias had always known war would cost them, but the reality of it, the faces of those they had lost, was beginning to weigh on him more than he had expected. Every decision now carried the knowledge that it could be someone's last. As the enemy fleet moved closer, the UHS Liberty and its allies prepared for their final stand. The human ships, damaged but still operational, lined up in formation, their weapons charged and ready. The crew worked in synchronized silence, preparing for the battle that would define humanity's future. Elias stood on the bridge, watching the stars ahead of him. "We've come a long way," he whispered to himself, "but we won't stop, not now." The fleet was ready, but they weren't just fighting for victory anymore. They were fighting for their place in the stars, fighting to prove that humanity would never bow again. The battle began without warning. The enemy fleet, large and well-equipped, emerged from the darkness, their ships swarming like a cloud of locusts. The hum of weapons charging filled the air, and the bridge came alive with orders being shouted, weapons firing, and the roar of battle. Elias' heart pounded in his chest as the first shots were fired. The sound of explosions rocked the ship, and the force of enemy fire rattled the UHS Liberty. Their shields held strong, but Elias knew that it wouldn't last. They had to end this battle quickly, or they would lose everything. "All ships target their command vessels," Elias barked. "We cripple their leadership and the rest will fall. Move now." The human fleet surged forward, moving with precision, each ship weaving through the barrage of enemy fire. Smaller fighter ships darted between the larger battleships, taking down key points of the enemy fleet. The UHS Liberty led the charge, its cannons blasting through the dark void, tearing into the enemy ships with deadly accuracy. For every enemy ship that fell, humanity's fleet took a hit in return. The battle raged on for hours, explosions lighting up the black sky. The human forces were relentless, but the cost of victory was becoming clear. Ships were lost. Lives were lost. In the heart of the battle, Elias watched as another explosion rocked the UHS Liberty. The ship groaned under the strain, its shields flickering. He could hear the sounds of alarms and crew shouting commands, but they kept fighting. "We can't hold much longer," Mara yelled, her face pale. "We're outnumbered and outgunned." Elias' eyes narrowed. "We're not backing down, we finish this now." With that, the final push began. The UHS Liberty and its fleet barreled into the heart of the enemy formation, breaking through their lines like a blade cutting through flesh. The enemy command ships faltered under the human assault, and one by one, the Council's forces began to retreat. It was over, the human fleet had won. But as the last enemy ship scattered, Elias couldn't bring himself to celebrate. His body was tired, his mind exhausted from the weight of battle. And as he looked out at the remnants of the battlefield, he felt the loss of so many that had fought beside him. The cost of their freedom was steep, too steep. As the human fleet began to regroup, Elias stood on the bridge, his eyes scanning the vast, quiet space in front of him. The battle had been won, but the galaxy had been irrevocably changed. There would be no going back to the way things were. Humanity had sent a message of defiance, of strength, and of hope. But Elias knew the fight wasn't over. The Galactic Council would regroup, and new enemies would rise. Humanity would need to stay vigilant to keep fighting for their place in the stars. But for now, humanity had won. They had fought for their freedom and they had claimed it. The galaxy would never be the same again. The silence in the aftermath of the battle felt deafening. The last remnants of the Krylian fleet had retreated, leaving behind nothing but wreckage and the burning remains of warships. The UHS Liberty had fought with everything it had, and so had its fleet. Humanity had delivered a blow to the Galactic Council that would be felt across the galaxy. But now, in the quiet that followed, there was a deep, uneasy calm. Elias Kale stood in front of the observation window, his hands behind his back, staring out into the cold, endless space. The stars shimmered like cold jewels, indifferent to the human cost of victory. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. "How many ships did we lose?" Elias asked, his voice distant. Mara Ishin stepped up beside him, her expression somber. "A lot, Commander. Our forces were stretched thin. We've lost several key ships and our fleet is weakened, but we've inflicted significant damage on the Council's forces. They won't recover easily." Elias nodded slowly, his thoughts heavy. The victory was necessary, but it had come at a steep price. Earth's fleet had lost too many good men and women. The cost of defiance was already clear. "What about the Council's response?" Elias asked, turning to face her. Mara hesitated for a moment. "They're already preparing for the next move. The Rithari and Krylian are rallying their forces, and there are rumors of alliances with the Brellians. We've become a target. They'll come for us again, Commander. Harder, faster." Elias' eyes darkened. He had known the Council wouldn't take this lying down. They would use their power, their influence, to crush humanity's rebellion. But he couldn't know, he wouldn't back down now. "Then we get ready," he said, his voice low but filled with resolve. "We've proven we can fight. Now we need to show them we're not going anywhere." The days that followed were a blur of strategy, preparation, and constant communication. Humanity's fleet had been damaged, but they were far from defeated. They reinforced their positions and began to gather their allies, reaching out to those who had already joined the cause and convincing others that humanity's fight was a fight for all species who had been oppressed by the Galactic Council. But Elias knew this wouldn't be enough. The Council's retaliation would be brutal. They were a force too powerful to ignore, and humanity would need more than just allies. They needed a plan. In a dimly lit war room, Elias sat with his top officers and advisors, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy. "The Rithari, the Krylian, and now the Brellians, they're all coming for us. We've made enemies of those who once called us allies. We need to strike before they do, but we need to be smart about it." Mara stood at his side. "We know they're gathering in the Vornes cluster. That's where their main forces are concentrating. If we hit them there, we can deal a serious blow to their momentum." "But," Elias interrupted, his voice hard, "if we go after the Vornes cluster, we risk leaving ourselves open. They'll anticipate our move. We can't afford to make that mistake. We need to hit them somewhere they won't expect." Admiral Hashino, who had been standing quietly off to the side, stepped forward. "We've done the unexpected before, Commander. We can do it again. If we spread our forces across 3 different systems, we'll force them to divide their fleet. We hit them in waves. They won't know where to focus their attack." Elias nodded thoughtfully. "I like it. We'll hit them hard and fast, and then we'll regroup. If we strike them on 3 fronts, we can stretch their resources thin. It might buy us enough time to keep the pressure on." The room fell silent as everyone processed the plan. It was risky. The Council would retaliate, no doubt about it. But it was the only option they had. The galaxy had made its choice, and now humanity would make theirs. They would fight. The plan was set into motion. Humanity's fleet split into three smaller forces, each targeting key council positions. The Vornes cluster, the Valden Reach, and the Irelys system would each feel the weight of humanity's power. They would be hit at the core, forcing the council to divide its attention. Elias stood on the bridge, looking out at the stars once more. "This is it," he muttered. "We either win this or we lose everything." The battles that followed were chaotic, unpredictable, and brutal. Humanity's fleets attacked with precision, striking hard at the heart of the Council's defenses. The Council's response was swift and ruthless, but humanity was relentless. They had proven their strength time and time again, and now they were showing the galaxy just how far they would go to secure their future. The UHS Liberty and its fleet surged forward into the heart of the Vornes cluster, cutting through enemy lines like a knife through butter. Enemy ships fell, one after another, as the human fleet pressed on. The Tizar system, the Kreiner system, and the Vornes cluster. Each victory was a testament to humanity's resolve, but each victory was also a reminder of the cost. Elias felt it in every explosion, every life lost. His heart ached with every fallen comrade, but there was no turning back. The price of freedom was always high, and humanity had already paid too much. The battle was won, but the war was not over. Elias stood alone in his quarters, looking out at the stars. The UHS Liberty had held the line, but the galaxy had not been quieted. The Council had lost battles, but they had not lost their will. The war was still raging, and Elias knew that no matter how many victories they won, the cost would keep rising. "We've only just begun," he whispered to himself. Humanity had been betrayed, but now they were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for their place in the galaxy. And they would fight until the very end. And Elias Kale would lead them forward, no matter the cost. The Vornes cluster was burning. Elias Kale stood on the bridge of the UHS Liberty, his eyes locked on the screen as the aftermath of the latest battle unfolded before him. The human fleet had pushed the Council back, but it had come at an unbearable cost. The ships that remained were battered, their hulls scorched, their weapons barely operational. The Council had come for them with everything they had, and humanity had fought back with the same ferocity. The victory, though significant, felt empty. The heavy toll of the battle hung in the air, and the faces of the fallen haunted Elias. Each victory made them one step closer to securing a future, but it also made the road ahead even more dangerous. The Galactic Council had already begun to regroup. They would not go down easily. "Commander, we've received another transmission," Mara Ishin said, her voice thick with exhaustion. She stepped up beside him, her face drawn, eyes tired. Elias didn't need to ask what it was. He had known the message would come, and it came now like a shadow in the dark. He nodded, "Put it through." The screen flickered, and Ambassador Zelkin appeared once again. His Rithari features were more severe than usual, and his voice was laced with frustration. "Commander Kale," Zelkin began, his tone cold, "humanity's actions have brought this galaxy to the edge of war. The Council has officially declared that Earth and its fleet are enemies of the galaxy. We will not allow you to continue your campaign of destruction." Elias felt his jaw tighten. There was no surprise in Zelkin's words. This was a war for survival, and the galaxy was beginning to pick sides. "You forced us into this position," Elias said firmly. "You betrayed us, and now you're angry that we're fighting for our survival. You should have treated humanity as an equal from the start." Zelkin's eyes narrowed. "Equality," he scoffed. "What you seek is domination. You have declared yourselves the rulers of the galaxy, and that is something the Council will not allow." Elias' voice grew quieter, but it carried the weight of years of struggle. "We didn't ask for this war, Zelkin, but now we have no choice. We will fight until the last of us stands, and we will win." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving an unsettling silence in the room. The Rithari had made their intentions clear, and so had the other council members. But what Zelkin didn't understand was that humanity wasn't fighting for domination. They were fighting for freedom, for their right to exist as equals among the stars. As the battle in the Vornes cluster raged on, Elias knew that this was the breaking point. They had been relentless, fighting through the chaos, but the Council wasn't going to back down. Their fleets were vast, their tactics ruthless, and they had the numbers to crush humanity if they didn't act swiftly. The war was no longer just about survival. It was about proving that humanity had a place in the galaxy. Elias could feel the weight of the future pressing down on him. Every decision, every command could mean the difference between life and death. But he couldn't afford to hesitate. The stakes were too high. "What are our options, Mara?" Elias asked, his voice steady but filled with concern. Mara looked at the map, her fingers tracing over the glowing lines of enemy fleets. "We're outnumbered, Commander. We've managed to cripple their fleets in the last few systems, but they're pulling in reinforcements. We're on the defensive now, and if we don't strike soon, they'll have us surrounded." Elias nodded grimly. "Then we make our move. We need to hit them at their heart, and we do it now. We won't wait for them to come to us. We take the fight to them." Mara's eyes met his. A direct assault on their command fleet. "Yes," Elias said. "We strike where it hurts. We destroy their leadership and the rest of their fleet will scatter. It's the only chance we have to end this." Hours later, the UHS Liberty and the human fleet surged forward, moving toward the Council's command fleet, hidden in the outskirts of the galaxy. It was a daring move, one that would require every ounce of strength they had left. If they succeeded, it would shift the balance of the war. If they failed, humanity would be left exposed, vulnerable to the Council's fury. The ships moved in unison, faster than any of the enemy could react. The UHS Liberty led the charge, its engines roaring as it cut through space, followed by the fleet of human ships. They didn't need subtlety. They needed force. "All ships target their command vessels," Elias ordered, his voice unwavering. "We take them down and we finish this." The battle that followed was the fiercest humanity had ever fought. The Council's fleet was massive, its ships built for war. But the human fleet fought with a fury that matched their desperation. The UHS Liberty weaved through the enemy fire, its cannons unleashing destruction as it struck at the heart of the Council's fleet. Enemy ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light, but the human fleet took hits as well. Shields flickered and failed, and the battle became a chaotic symphony of destruction. But there was no turning back. This was their final chance. The UHS Liberty and its fleet surged forward, pressing deeper into the heart of the enemy forces, cutting through the chaos like a blade through paper. As the battle wore on, Elias stood at the command console, sweat on his brow, his face etched with determination. The human fleet was giving everything they had, and it showed. The Council's flagship was in sight, and with it, the fate of the galaxy. "Prepare for the final strike," Elias said, his voice a whisper. "This is it. We end this now." The UHS Liberty took a final, decisive turn, locking onto the Council's flagship. The enemy ship fired, but it was too late. With a roar, the human fleet unleashed everything they had. The command ship exploded in a blinding flash, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. For a moment, everything was still. The Council's leadership had been shattered. As the last of the enemy forces scattered, Elias looked out at the destruction. The fight wasn't over, not yet, but they had struck a decisive blow. Humanity had proven its strength, and the Galactic Council had learned a painful lesson. Humanity would no longer be ignored. Elias Kale stood tall, his eyes hardened by the fire of battle. "This isn't just about survival," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "It's about a future, our future, and we're not going to let anyone take it from us." The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, more sacrifices. But for the first time in the galaxy's history, humanity had taken control of its own destiny. And Elias knew they would never look back.